it's about developing the courage to tell your story. And that kind of storytelling, it requires vulnerability. It means reflecting on your experience and then being bold enough to share them, not for applause, but for impact. Because our stories, they're not just ours, they're bridges, they're blueprints, they're breadcrumbs for someone else coming behind us or beside us. And when you start to see learning through that lens, not just for you, but for the people who will glean from you, it hits different. Welcome to the Shattered Mindset Podcast, wisdom from life's turning points and defining moments. I'm your host, Melvin Larry. Look, you see these? All of these lanyards here. These lanyards represent years of training, of workshops, of conferences and masterminds and events. Listen, just a decades of training and so forth. Listen, maybe even I shouldn't have been in the room on some of them, I don't know, but I showed up anyway. And every one of them is a receipt of time, energy, intention, and a deep, lifelong commitment to learning. Because here's the truth. Growth is not automatic, and learning is not a one-time event. Let me just tell you what these lanyards really represent to me. You see, learning is a lifestyle if you make it so. Look, I didn't grow up with a silver spoon or a map to success. I didn't know if I could get rich by attending all of these, but one thing is for sure, I did get enriched. I've always believed that I didn't know something, or if I didn't know something, I could figure it out. I may not have had the right words or may not have the best way to say it, but I had a willingness to dig, to ask, to observe, and to learn. And that's what these lanyards mean to me. They say he showed up. They say he kept growing. And more importantly, they say to me, at least, he didn't fake it, he learned it. And let me tell you, learning isn't just about facts or frameworks. It's about developing the courage to tell your story. And that kind of storytelling, it requires vulnerability. It means reflecting on your experience and then being bold enough to share them, not for applause, but for impact. Because our stories, they're not just ours, they're bridges, they're blueprints, they're breadcrumbs for someone else coming behind us or beside us. And when you start to see learning through that lens, not just for you, but for the people who will glean from you, it hits different. Let's go deeper and circle back to something I touched on in a previous episode, the value of reading versus listening. Look, when it comes to learning, I believe in both, but they serve different purposes, especially when we're talking about books, both paper and audio books. Reading for me is deep work. When I read, I've got a highlighter in hand, a pen ready to underline, and sometimes I'm even scribbling through the margins. Look, reading slows me down enough to digest the message, to extract it, to revisit it. Often reading and rereading a sentence or a paragraph, reading gives me ownership of the knowledge. Now, listening, that's beautiful too, especially in this age where we're on the move. You can throw on a podcast or an audio book while you're in the gym or walking the dog or driving to a meeting. You hear tone, you feel energy, you absorb in motion. This is especially powerful when the author is also the narrator of the audio book. That's really good. Okay, you feel him or her. But I'll be honest, when I listen, my mind tends to just wander more than when I read, actually. So I've learned to use listening for momentum and inspiration and reading for mastery and depth. And I encourage you to use both wisely. Man, there are times when I'm listening and reading a book simultaneously together, but don't just consume, reflect, apply. Let it change you. But remember, whether you're reading, listening, or training, it's not transformation. Application is. You can go to all the events. You can collect all the lanyards. You can listen to every top podcast. But if you don't do something with what you've learned, it's just entertainment. Some people are professional students. They attend everything. They post pictures with the speakers. Like, look, I've seen people just going around saying, I'm supposed to take a picture with everybody. All right, or getting them to sign my book and all this good stuff. All right, that's their purpose. But their lives don't change. See, information doesn't equal transformation, application does. I remember one event I went to of many, tons of speakers, tons of content. I had pages of notes like I always do. But there was one guy who laid out a simple formula in this particular event, step by step, to take your business to the next level in 90 days. That was my nugget for that event. I went to that event with intention. I was not a spectator. I came back, applied it exactly the way he said. And you know what? I got the results, not because I took notes, but because I took action. Look, let me say something that really, it might just even free somebody. All right. Even with all the training, reading, and other stuff, there were still moments in my journey when I walked into a room and I thought, man, do I belong here? Even after all that stuff. Look, I was surrounded by people who were smarter, more successful sometimes, more experienced, and definitely in many cases making more money. And I was tempted to fake it. All right. A lot of times people do. Okay. But I wanted to pretend sometimes I was on their level. I just didn't want to look bad. Okay. But here's the problem with that: your conversation will give you away. You can try to fake experience, but man, you can't fake process. But instead, I stayed quiet. I listened. I learned. And I came to understand that being in the room didn't mean I had to already be like them. It meant I was becoming. TD Jakes once said, if you're the smartest person in your group, you need a new group. Man, that's truth. Being surrounded by greatness pulls you up. Here's another benefit of learning that we don't talk about enough, especially for those of us past 50, 60, or more: reading, listening, training. These are exercises for the brain. They're not just about success, they're about sustainability. They fight cognitive decline, they sharpen focus. They give you something to look forward to, something to build. So while others are saying, I'm too old to learn, I'm over here saying, I'm too alive to stop. The most rewarding part of all this learning: sharing it with my children, my grandchildren, with the people I mentor, with you right now. Sharing the lessons, sharing the stories. You know, stories create awareness, and awareness creates value. You never know what'll stick with someone. You never know when a single story, a single quote, or a single moment will become their turning point. So don't hold back. Look, before this week is out, in fact, I challenge you: tell someone in your circle something you've learned. Because as I've said, the lessons you've learned are not just for you. So listen, one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned came from my pastor. He took me to a conference many years ago as one of his audio engineers. He was in a meeting with pastors, and while I and one of the other engineers, we attended technical events and such. During the break, my pastor sat down with me and he asked me, he said, so what have you learned? And I said, I've learned that I don't know very much. Look, he smiled and said, then you've learned a lot. Hmm. Insight. Man, that stayed with me because he knew I understood something important, that I had room to grow and I was willing to grow. See, real wisdom isn't in knowing everything, it's in staying open, staying humble, staying teachable. And if getting in the room behind these lanyards I got here, if that taught me anything, it's that learning isn't what makes you better than someone else, it's what makes you better than who you used to be. Hey, in the previous episode, I talked about lessons I've learned in life. Check it out. All right. But look, here, I'm going to close this out today, and I'll come back and talk to you a little bit more next week. But take the information that I've shared with you, deposit it, withdraw it at applicable times to make yourself better, to make someone else better. Learning, keep growing, keep developing. Until the next time, keep adapting, keep evolving, and keep reaching for those higher horizons. I'll see you next time on the Shattered Mindset podcast. Take care. Take charge. God bless.